Liz, welcome to Asians Represent. This is the first ever Asians Represent like short interview. We don't do these.
Well, thank you so much for having me on, and I'm honored that I'm the first one. I'm your guinea pig.
And it works really well. Not quite guinea pig that you own Angry Hamster Publishing.
Oh,
I don't know if you meant that intentionally, but I'm really hyped that you reached out because you're kind of someone who I've always wanted to have on like the podcast, but scheduling topics, it just hasn't aligned. But now Agatha has been really pushing me to try to do more short form content where we can actually interview creators and business owners and talk about their specific products in a way that is, hey, let's promote your stuff, let's uplift other Asian folks who are sort of in the RPG industry. And I'm really excited that you agreed to be the first one. You agreed to be the guinea pig.
yeah. I mean, I had the same thing. Like we've always we've been in the circle, and then I was like, okay, yes, now is the time. It's gonna happen.
This
We're gonna
this is
talk.
my moment. And you know what? It's
Yeah,
funny because we work together on Avatar, where
yeah,
you are the current project manager for the Avatar Legends role playing game, which is quite the achievement, I might add.
yeah. I didn't expect it to happen. I was very surprised when it did, but I'm grateful that I get to do the project and work with so many cool people. It was just yeah, I mean a whirlwind. Like I don't know what to say. It's Avatar. Like I guess you feel the same way, right? Like it was just like, oh wow, we did that. Like that's a
Yeah,
book now, you
that's a
know?
thing. That's like a thing that my name will forever be associated with. That's a thing that your name will forever be associated with.
Yeah, yeah. And we're just getting to add in those influences to add to the world that you love so dearly in a way that represents your culture and who you are is just really exciting.
Yeah, especially, for a property that is like famously like one that's just like, ah, yes, it's that property created by two white people, but Asian people really don't have too much of a problem with it. And for, you to kind of manage the entire project, it was like almost $10 million on Kickstarter is really awesome. And, and the assignment that one of the assignments that I got was, working on like NPC names and all that was something that I felt really pleased to be able to do because we see fake Asian names all the time, and I wanted to make sure that there was some real stuff in there. So thank you for that. I never got to sort of thank you one to one. Um,
I should thank you. I look at your list every other day. Like honestly, it's possibly one of the most useful things that someone's written for us. So,
oh, I'm happy. I'm happy. Um, oh wow, oh my, I'm gonna blush. Or might already be blushing, but no, that's very kind of you. Thank you. But we're not here to praise me. We're here to praise you. And yeah, that's right. We're here to praise you. And which I want to know all about your upcoming second edition release of Witch. So first, before we dive into it, I want the audience to get to know you. Who are you? Because we talked extensively before we started recording about how to pronounce your surname, and I was like, okay, all day practicing. I was like, Liz, super easy name. That's your first name, super easy name. But your last name, I had to make sure I got it right, and I practiced all day. And so, who is Liz Chaipraditkul?
Hi. I'm Liz. I currently live in the Netherlands. I have a Dutch passport now too, so I am
Oh,
Dutch. And I am a Thai Italian game designer. I'm the owner of Angry Hamster Publishing, which is the company that's bringing out Witch. And I am also project manager for Avatar Legends, the role playing game. And I've worked on various other projects
yeah.
throughout the years.
Your bibliography is quite extensive. Like you and I both worked on Haunted West, actually. I did not know
Yeah.
you worked on that. So you and I both worked on that. But you also worked on like the Root RPG. You've worked on Scion. You've worked on like Tiny Cthulhu, which I didn't know was a thing until I started doing research on you, as well as like a lot of other really great projects like Laser Kittens, which I did not know existed until I looked you up.
Oh my goodness, Daniel. Like laser kittens. I love that game so much. Like,
It's incredible. And then you also worked on Awakened with Andreas from Metal Weave Games.
yeah, Andreas and I
Long
worked on a lot of stuff. Yeah.
Andreas is awesome and a like longtime friend of the podcast. So when I saw that, I was like, oh, you've worked with like the who's who of people, and you're like your body of work is very, very impressive. And I think that a lot more people need to know who you are.
I, I think, I mean, we talked about this. Like, I eschew most social media. So that's
Mhm.
probably why I just like, I mean, I know a lot of people behind the scenes, but I tend not to like get out there so much. So yeah, I guess maybe that's why.
No, I think
But yeah, a lot of projects.
I think you're one of those people who, you work quietly behind the scenes until, you know, you are so powerful and so mighty that nobody can deny who you are and what you've done. Uh, and, like Avatar and Witch are like these big or future big projects that people are going to know you for. So I was looking up Witch, and admittedly, I have never played the first edition. I've seen it a lot. The cover is very iconic. I was actually at, I remember seeing it at the game store. There was a local game store I went to a couple weeks ago and seeing that and thought, oh, that was interesting. But I never picked it up. And now I kind of regret it because having read the second edition Quick Start, I am very, very intrigued by this game. But I know that a lot of folks who listen to or watch Asians Represent are mostly D&D players. So what is Witch? Like, what is
So
this game? Is it a game where you kind of like role play around cauldrons? Like, what is it?
I wish it was, I mean, like,
It's
I'm now
very
rethinking my
evocative.
game design.
It's a very so when I saw Witch for the very first time, it was very to me it was very evocative of medieval and early modern European themes as well as like sort of like modern pagan Wicca. Uh, but diving in, there's way more. So I want to hear from you. What is Witch?
So, like, the elevator pitch is that you play a member of the Fated or a witch, and you're someone who has sold their soul to a demon for power. There's a lot of different reasons that people do that. It could be, for example, you had a sick family member and you wanted to save them. And therefore you're like, oh, sure. Like, if you're like me, I'd be the person who'd be like, you want my soul? Okay, go ahead, because I don't believe that there is a soul. And then
Loophole.
afterwards, yeah, and then afterwards been like, I made a mistake. Like,
That's
um,
awesome.
but the result of that is that you get magical powers and you're welcomed kind of into this supernatural world that lives within our own.
Right.
And it's very much, like, if you've seen Charmed, Chilling Adventures of Sabrina, American Horror Story, Coven, that's kind of where we're going with it, but like a much more eclectic kind of international feel,
Right.
representing a little bit my own background as well.
Of course, being like a mixed person, there's kind of that sort of we talk about this a lot, the idea of identity and like what is your cultural identity and how can you express that. So that's it was really refreshing to see that because when a lot of folks reach out, they're like, "Hey, I'm an Asian creator. I'm working on this game. Can I be on Asians Represent?" And then I kind of look at the product and I'm like, "I don't know what we're going to talk about because this is about medieval Europe." Um, but looking at it, like on page 4 of the PDF of the Quick Start, it was immediately very, very apparent that despite this sort of European association with the word witch,
Mm,
folk religion is very much something that exists in cultures around the world. And the idea of very loosely somebody who practices witchcraft can be found all over the world. And that's relevant to the game and very, very obvious in the fate section that you and I were talking about before the recording. Now, on this idea of this sort of international feel, I wanted to kind of start with a really deep question that I feel like will form the foundation of this interview. And it's how do you handle sort of the complexities of all of these different folk religions and that you're kind of drawing from the idea of witchcraft in this general term? Because, when I look at two big examples that stood out to me, sort of like yokai from Japan, which we've talked about on the podcast, and jinn from sort of pre-Islamic and Islamic theology, which we've also talked about on Asians Represent on our YouTube channel. Like, how do you kind of explain the impact or lack thereof that this has on gameplay? Like, how do you sort of reconcile for the nuances of each of these?
Yeah, I mean, we also have like the Dryaothe that are like the Celtic ones as well,
Mm-hmm.
and I mean, they don't have any connection to demons, like traditionally speaking, in their lore. But basically, so every the way we explain it in the game world, and then I'll get into like the
Sure.
deeper
Yeah.
mechanics of it. The way we explain it in the game world is that fates popped up everywhere. Fates can, like, you can have a yokai who pops up in the States, or they can pop up in Hong Kong or in Bangkok or wherever. Um, but when they first kind of started appearing and demons started taking their souls and people saw their powers, the lay person, the person who's like not connected to the magical world, who saw someone shape
Right.
shifting into a dog, was like, oh, like, and then like, oh, that must be a yokai, without actually, you know what I mean? It's the idea. It's the same thing of like, you see a woman with power and you're like, witch, burn the witch.
Right.
It's like, well,
Association.
association. Um, that said, that's like the very basic, like that's how we explain it in the game world.
Mm.
And then like kind of the deeper design ideas, like there's kind of two things about it that I think when you're creating a game, you have to be intentional with the words you use. Like you were talking about like names, for example, like that we used in Avatar. Like
Yeah.
you have to be, you have to have an intentionality behind what you're doing, because you're basically creating like the world's most interesting like textbook that you're expecting people to read and understand, right? Like, and
Totally.
like refer back to. And one way to do that is to like kind of use these names that people have associations with. So they automatically kind of know, oh, okay, this is kind of probably what my character is going to do. And then once you start reading more into it, you're like, oh, cool, shapeshifting. I want to shapeshift. The more you read into the faith, the more you see the nuances of it and how it's going to be different and the culture behind it and stuff like that.
Right. And while there are like quite a few that are actually listed in the quick start, I mean, you've got, it looks like there's one, two, three, four, five, six, seven of them.
Yeah.
Will there be more in like the full game? Because I'm already thinking of like, oh, there are people who are associated with like making sort of like arrangements with like kitsune in Japanese culture. There are examples of this in China as well. Will there be other cultures also represented in like the full game?
There are more. These are the ones that we have in the game as it is.
Right.
And we have a couple planned down the pipeline, but we, like, one thing that we really paid attention to in this was like getting consultants to work on it, making sure that we didn't just use the name to give associations, but we were also respectful to what we were trying to represent, in the way that like magic and like that folklore is used. So just like we haven't done the research for those newer ones yet to actually be able to bring them out, but it's in the pipeline.
Of course, no, that's, I mean, I find that very comforting to hear because when a lot of folks kind of put out a quick start, they're like, this is everything. They kind of rush and they don't take the time. They don't put in the work. They don't do the research or hire the right consultant. So that's actually really great to hear, that there is more to come because what you've already put out on the quick start is really, really exciting. It's very, very interesting that I think people can find themselves better represented in something that at a glance may be associated with sort of European religion when really it's not. And I kind of like how you use these terms to kind of draw people in and kind of get curious because that is one of the main sort of tenets of this game. What I found really interesting is actually that because when you look at popular games like D&D in the Dungeons and Dragons player's handbook, they kind of describe sort of three pillars of gameplay, sort of exploration, sort of that social interaction and combat. But the quick start for Witch, second edition, talks about three central themes of being trapped, sort of curiosity about the potential of magic or the discovery or this awakened knowledge. And then this like hope for freedom, which all three of which I find incredibly compelling. So one of the things I wanted to sort of dive into now that we've kind of established like, hey, you can represent your own culture in this and these words, these names are kind of included in which in a way that's, culturally respectful to kind of evoke, sort of the action of having yourself represented in the game. Like, how do you design a game around these themes of like being trapped, curiosity about magic, and hope. Because when you compare those to the sort of pillars of D&D's gameplay of like exploration, pretty straightforward, social interaction, talking with other people, and combat, just killing things. These ones are far more complex and nuanced. So, how do you even approach designing a game around these thematic touch points? I also kind of want to use this as a spring point to talk about like why even a second edition in the first place.
Yeah, so like the for me, every time I play a role play game, I always want it to be about me and like also about the other people at the table too, like equally about the five
That's
of
like the
us.
the unspoken truth about role playing games, right?
Yeah, I'm like this is about me and my drama and my suffering and my friends' drama and their suffering. And I want cool things to happen around us. So that's always how I approach my game design as well. So the first thing that we're designing the game for is for the players to have that experience. And in order to do that, the pillars of the game have to support a personal story rather than an overarching kind of adventure. So when when we're figuring out kind of like the themes for the game, we're like, okay, well, what do we want to do, and what's the end goal here, right? And the end goal for which is the idea that either you're going to free yourself or maybe turn worse than your demon. There's a couple
Descend
of
further into
yeah
evil.
yeah. There's some cool options there. That you can play with, and then from there designing the game outwards, because people are going to find adventure no matter where they are, right? Like just by the basic thing of like I need to negotiate with my demon every X amount of times to get what I want, and they're going to ask me to do something that immediately creates an adventure as long as your setting is rich enough. Which goes back to why we've drawn from like the world rather than just
Of
one
course,
culture.
yeah.
like, um, so yeah, like that, like putting the players kind of in the driver's seat of that has always been how I've kind of thought of like the pillars of the game.
Right.
So actually, the one pillar of the game is like the player story, and
Mm.
from there, it's like the theme is just what would be cool for that, you know?
Right. So this brings up something like I didn't think about until you kind of mentioned, hey, I need to negotiate with my demon. I am bringing myself, my own drama to this table, whether it be virtual or in person. And I fully expect everyone else to also bring their drama to whatever degree they find sort of comforting to the
Yeah.
table as well. What what does a session look like if every single character, every single player has to negotiate with another entity? That sort of the storyteller, the game master, the person running, the facilitator, the dramatic manager has to actually sort of manage. Like, how do you do that? Like, what does that look like? Because to me, it sounds like a really daunting task. It's like every single person in the D&D equivalent is a warlock, and I have to then also manage their patrons and all of these different sort of end goals. Like, how do you manage that? How do you kind of mechanize and guide people through that if they've never played a role-playing game like this before?
So basically, we have mechanics that support when demons would actually get summoned. So there's a
Right.
couple of reasons, like when you cast too much magic. Like I'm using very basic terms because y'all can download the quick start and you'll see. Um, but like when you cast way too much magic, in order to kind of get the world, like the ether of the world, normal around you again, so you don't end up
Mm-hmm.
causing a magical catastrophe. One way you can do that is to negotiate with your demon, but that won't happen in one session unless you're incredibly reckless. Like, and then like, good luck
Gotcha.
to any GM who's going to deal with that.
Yeah.
Um, but so like, what I've experienced in playtesting is it essentially happens that we're seeing one demonic patron maybe every session or every other session. So everyone kind of gets their turn.
Right.
And really, you have to reach a certain power cap, basically. Like, I mean, to relate it for your listeners, like almost like leveling. Like,
Yeah.
and
In a loose
there's six
sense.
in a loose sense, yeah. So there's six different levels you can go through. So it's not like reaching from level 1 to level 2. It's a bit higher than that. And then you can negotiate for more power. So not every player is doing it every session.
Right. So you're You're bargaining. You're putting yourself closer to another deal or negotiating on the terms of your existing deal. But that demon, that entity, isn't literally over your shoulder at every single juncture of the story. You're kind of guiding the storytellers is guiding the players there potentially.
Well, yeah, and that's what's the great like that's the great thing about about players is like you have like the hex, so that's like the ones who like make a deal with it, like someone who's actually called a devil, and the devils are like the worst, so they like actively want the worst for you,
Mm.
given like their name, and just having a player who's a hex who has a devil, and because of what they've read, immediately like they create that suspense for themselves. So like their devil will be like, Daniel, I just want you to take this box and deliver it to this building. That's all I want you to do. And
Don't
then like,
open it.
sure, you can have more magic. But like, you'll see that player sit with that box for like 3 sessions, like, I don't know if I could do this. Like, so they end up torturing themselves without you having to do anything as a
Yeah,
GM. Like,
offload a lot of that sort of labor onto the players and the stories that they tell. So through the mechanics, I guess it
yeah.
kind of creates that suspense. That's really interesting. And you also mentioned that like, hey, maybe this session somebody sort of, I guess their patron their demon comes out this one session. So this game is then ultimately designed for like multi-session play. Is it
Yeah. I mean, like you can definitely, like we have a one shot
in a quick start?
in the quick start, which is super fun. But I think like I love the long story, and I love really getting into people's backstories and like their motivations, and like seeing whether they can escape this claustrophobia. And for that, you need a couple sessions. Like if you're looking at a one shot, it's really like let's do some fun and some magic, and have some cool supernatural escapades, which is also cool. But like for the deeper story, you need a couple sessions.
Right, you could do your sort of like monster of the week, like supernatural sort of thing, or you could have your long, slow burn of like a build up to something really, really catastrophic and dramatic. I guess, right?
Yeah.
So I guess then the number of sessions that one would be sort of employing for this game would really set the tone of the entire story, right?
Yeah, I think so. And I mean, I think Um, you know, because we designed the game with like an endpoint for the players,
Mm-hmm.
like you can have like an epic long campaign and really reach that, or you can just like, reach a couple of goals to have that dramatic payoff that you want. And then be like, okay, that was good. That was awesome. We defeated X, right? And then
Right.
if you're looking for really like I'm going to like kick my demon's ass, that is all I want to do, then you're looking at the long game.
Right. I'm already thinking of like a character that I would want to play, like somebody who's made a deal with something tremendously evil and sees and is full of regret and kind of sees that, okay, I have this power. I can negotiate with this power and get more of it. But my ultimate goal is to actually purge myself of this evil and purge the universe of this evil that I am then kind of using for that. And I think that would be something really interesting to tell. It's kind of how do you bargain with evil to how do you fight evil with evil basically.
Yeah. And do least harm and still kind of support the society you live in. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the character that I would play. Oh, that's really I want to die. Well, I'm going to play a full long campaign of this then, so I could tell this story, and I will find someone who will run it for me, or I will run it, and then I will say, "Hey, there's an NPC. This is their motivations. We'll see." No, that's fascinating. I find games that really make you think about tough consequences. Games like Ten Candles, games like Dread, um, where the end can be dramatic and awful, and you're just trying to mitigate as much damage as possible before you kind of get to that end point. I think something like that is really interesting, and how you have to navigate those sacrifices with a group of people who are in a similar situation yet slightly different, I think is really fascinating. Uh,
Well, yeah, and like how much you're willing to support each other too, right? Because you have a coven, so like you have this society of people around you, are like they want to support you because they're like your messy family.
yeah.
But like how far are they willing to go for that? Like Steffi and I, like she came on to develop. We had that discussion She's like, but I'd support you if you want to become a demon at the end of that. I'm like, would you though, Steffi? Would you
Would
really?
you?
She's like, I think that's fine. And I'm like, I don't know if I'd support you though. So you have those conversations already and you're like, okay, how far is Steffi going to go? Cause like,
Yeah, it's like I can say that I'm going to support you, but when it really comes down to it, probably not.
yeah, it's like,
I
if you're
think
an
that
all powerful witch, do you need to be a demon? You know,
yeah, but I mean, can you continue to be an all-powerful witch without that demon?
ooh, yes,
That's
see,
that's an actual question. Can you, as a magical user, exist without said sort of very loosely defined patron?
yeah. So basically, we in the society, so that's kind of like the witch society, that's like
Right.
international. They know that there's these spells called malum, and or like I mean they have many different names. The name we use in the game is called malum,
Right.
and these spells basically help you break free from your demon. But in order to do that, you need to make more deals from your demon because basically you need to become more powerful to be able to cast the spell. Because like if you would just cast the spell as like a witch who was just fated, like you'd be ripped apart, right? Like you're just like, yeah,
Right.
you can't actually channel the magic. And the demons want more deals from you. So it's kind of a cat and mouse game that you play with them until eventually you can cast this final spell. And in the final casting, you're asked a couple questions, which I'm not going to spoil,
Yeah, yeah.
about the choices that you have made throughout the game in order to see whether or not that your final fight with your demon is ultimately successful and you break free, or ultimately a tragic story.
Right. It's kind of you play with this sort of addiction to power. Almost like how people gamble. It's like, oh, just a little bit more, just a little bit more. And I can finally get to that point where I pay off my debt, or in this case, amass enough power to purge myself of this thing that has given me that power to begin with.
Yeah.
That's really fascinating. I was literally going to ask, well, like, why should people play Witch? But for me, it's like, I know why I want to play Witch. It's because I want to examine sort of internally power imbalances. I want to see how other people deal with a similar struggle, deal with the consequences of very deeply personal actions. I want to see people aggrandize power or maybe grow to fear power that they have. I think for me, these are all reasons to play Witch. These are all reasons to support this game and make sure that it exists. But for you, I don't want to ask this as like the owner of these sort of Angry Hamster Publishing. I want to ask this like to you, Liz. Like, why do you like to play Witch? Like, why did you embark on this journey? Like, what is it about this game that you love and you want to make sure people understand?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, like I already mentioned this. Like I like it for the drama. I like it because you can pose hard questions. Like you can very easily pose hard questions to people that you don't expect people to like get in an argument or a debate about. Like we've had some like discussions when we've played a game of Witch that like have completely caught me off guard. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I'll
Right.
have a player being like, I'm just going to do this. And like, in my mind as a GM, I'm like, that sounds totally reasonable. Like,
Of
and
course.
then, like, yeah, of course you'll do that. And then another player will be like, what are you doing? Like, are you like, are you off it?
Hmm.
And for me, like, those conversations, able to have them kind of like in this safe environment of a role play game and like kind of explore those boundaries, like, is so interesting for me. And since I'm normally the GM, I just get to sit and listen to people like have these discussions,
Right.
which,
Of course.
yeah, like, which I just find so interesting. So I'm just sitting there, I'm like, I don't know what they're going to do,
So it's
you
like
know?
as somebody who you love the drama, you love the tea, and you're just kind of listening, and just like, oh yes, just entertain me.
I find it so entertaining. Like, I genuinely like, I'm the person yelling at the TV, basically. Like, I'm that person. So,
Love
like,
it.
as a GM, I love to watch players do that and just like for them to have those conversations and think about things in a way that I haven't. And normally being faced with those moral choices, like people have those conversations.
Oh, I love that. And I think that's a very valid reason why anyone else would want to buy this game. Now that said, which second edition is going to be live on Kickstarter as of October 31st, and it runs through November.
Yeah.
And then if you're watching this afterwards, which is probably out, it might be on BackerKit, or even down the line, it's probably out on like Drive Through RPG or anything like that. Um, Anything that you want to share, any socials, where can people find you on the internet if they have questions? I know you're not super into the social media, into the
Yeah.
Twitter, but if
Just
people want to know more about Witch, I'll have all the relevant Kickstarter links in the description or on YouTube or the show notes on the podcast. But anything else that you kind of want to tell people if they want to go for more information, if they just want to learn about the game or start thinking about these stories, where can people go to kind of get inspired?
Yes, I mean, we have a website, angryhamsterpublishing.com, and you can also go to Twitter. We're on Twitter at angryhamsterrpg. And also, we have a Facebook group, which we just started because,
Nice.
well, we had a page. I was hacked. It's a whole long story. There's a new Facebook group, which is way more awesome because we can actually interact a bit better. So you can like ask questions and stuff like that. And if you just go into Facebook and type in Angry Hamster Publishing, you'll find the group and join. Everyone is welcome. Just
Nice.
be nice to each other.
Yeah, I'll put links to all of that in the associated show notes or descriptions. But Liz, I want to thank you for joining me for this interview, telling me a little bit about which sounds just like it sounds like a very personal endeavor. Whenever somebody sets off to make a game about sort of hard decisions and consequences and sort of facilitating drama, I know that can't be a hard thing. It can't be an easy thing to write. I know that there is a lot of you in that book, and I'm really excited for people to kind of see that sort of passion in the writing, in the art, and in the direction that that game takes. So thank you very much for joining me for the very first episode of us talking to indie developers about their games.
Thank you so much for having me. It was really awesome talking to you.
Awesome. Well, that said, which is going to be on Kickstarter October 31st. Get the second edition, support it, support local. I guess local, I shouldn't say that because we're international. Support Asian creators, support small publishers, and try to tell stories that are different. Try to experiment with being uncomfortable and exploring maybe darkness, evil, and see what it does to your character. See what it does to you when you try to purge your character of that in which second edition.